Good morning. I'm Alan Kress, Chief of Wayne County Emergency Services and your North Carolina NENA President. I just got a text from Christine asking all of us to make a video about where we were when the attacks happened on 9/11/2001. It came at the most appropriate time. I just got home from Rowan County's 9/11 memorial at our firefighter memorial site in Salisbury. There was a piece of metal from one of the towers there that fell. On 9/11/2001, I was at my fire department's only, at the time, emergency elementary school, participating in a fun day, complete with a mobile smokehouse. The county's fire marshal found out what happened and was telling us about it. It was very somber because his father was a New York Fire Department firefighter that was killed in line of duty many years before that. A very somber moment for us all. I want to take the time to thank all of you for what you do daily for your communities. Thank you, Christine.
September 11th, 2001 is a day that, for all of us who were alive then, we'll never forget. And as I've reflected back, it's amazing on the little things that you remember from the day. For me, I was a senior in high school that day, and we were in our normal morning class, and we got word about the plane striking the building. So at the time, not much was thought about it, and then we kept getting more and more details that it was far more significant than we first realized. So I was at a private school. There were 13 people in my graduating class, and TVs were limited on the campus, but we did have a teacher who was actually our teacher at the time who lived less than 2 blocks away from the school. So my vivid memory is the 13 of us all sitting in my teacher's living room watching news coverage for the remainder of the day. At the time, we never could really grasp what was happening and what the world would look like the day after. But the day after is the day I remember the most. The United States of America, we were united. We weren't Democrat, we weren't Republican, we were all united. And that's the memory I try to take away from September 11th, is how we can all do so much more when we are united. So it was a horrific day, or a horrific attack, but I hope that we can still take lessons today just from what we learned on September 12th, the day after.
Hi, I'm Jennifer White, NENA President. I think back to September 11th, 2001, and I had just completed a 24-hour shift as a paramedic on an ambulance. I went home and tried to sleep, but obviously the alerts kept coming through, and I wasn't sure what was going on at first, so I finally got up, ended up going back into work and realizing what had happened. I remember feeling shock, sadness, and then just anguish. Anguish at all of those first responders that just went to work, that just put a uniform on just like I had the day before, and were just trying to do their jobs. It was shocking that someone would attack America. It was shocking to think of all the first responders, firefighters, law enforcement, EMS that we lost, and all those 911 telecommunicators that were answering call after call after call for days and unable to really do much to help most of those people. It's just excruciating. May we never forget September 11th, 2001.
North Carolina APCO, good morning. Jason Kern from APCO International, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you and remember the events of September 11th, 2001 and the impact that it's had on my life. It's a time that I'll never forget, sitting in an Illinois APCO meeting when the first plane struck and returning to my dispatch center that day and processing the calls. And I'll just remember the surrealness and the eerie silence of what happened. And I encourage everybody to never forget.
Hey everybody, it's Christine Moore, your first Vice President for North Carolina APCO. On September 11th, 2001, my husband and I had just returned home from our honeymoon, and I was sleeping when the first plane hit because I had to go out on patrol that night in High Point. I was a police officer in High Point. And my husband came in after the first plane hit and said, "You need to wake up, you need to come and see what's happened." And I came out just in time to see the second plane hit the tower. We sat riveted to the TV for hours after that happened. We had personal connections. My brother was a pilot for American Airlines. Thankfully, he was safe. My sister was in DC across the Potomac River from the Pentagon, and was subsequently deployed on a Navy ship the next day. My sister-in-law was living in DC and was pregnant and due any time with her first child. And so it was a very stressful time. I remember going to work that night and everything being eerily quiet, and it seemed to stay that way for weeks after 9/11 happened. Everybody was patriotic. Everybody was flying flags. Everybody was caring for one another. You didn't pass by somebody when they didn't speak. And if you were in uniform, you passed by somebody and they thanked you. And it was a scary time. It was a sad time, but it was a wonderful time in seeing how this country came together. I'll never forget.
September the 11th, 2001 is a day that I will never forget in my lifetime. Back then, I was working for the North Carolina Justice Academy, and I was teaching a telecommunicator certification course in Edneyville, North Carolina, at that second campus. We had taken a break, so I had went down to the first floor to get something from a snack machine. As I passed the employee lounge, one of my coworkers literally grabbed me and pulled me into the room. What I saw next will forever be burned into my memory. What I saw was a picture of the Twin Towers. And just as I stepped into the room, the plane came into view. I turned to my coworker and said, "What movie are you watching?" Because everybody knows the airspace around the towers is restricted. And right about then, that plane crashed through that building. We looked at each other and he said, "Gerald, this is live TV." After that, the rest of the week is a blur. I ran back upstairs. We put the TV on in my classroom, let our students know what was going on. And I remember just having this sense of dread as the rest of the events of that horrific day unfolded. The best memory I have is the sense of unity that we had in this country. I never felt more prouder during that time after that horrible day to be an American. We ran out of flags all over our country as we proudly held up our heroes that we had lost and those that were working diligently to save and then recover those that had lost their lives on that day. It is a day that we should remember, and we should honor those that survived, and we should honor those that we lost as we go forward and do the work, great work in public safety.
Hi, I'm Chad Dees, 911 Director for Robeson County. On 9/11, I was at Asheville Technical Community College, enrolled in the ECT class. I will never forget the instructor coming to the door and telling us all to come look at the live footage just as the second tower had just been struck by the plane.
Hello everyone, I'm Brian Drum, your North Carolina NENA Western Region Rep. On the morning of September 11, 2001, I was working a console in the 911 center. What I remember about that morning after the attacks was there seemed to be no phone calls coming in and very little radio traffic, as everyone was glued to their TVs watching the tragic events unfold across our nation.
So on September 11th, 2001, I was a freshman in high school. And I remember that day I was sitting in my English class when an announcement came over the intercom for all teachers to turn on the TVs in their classrooms, and that there had been an attack on the World Trade Center. And being a naive 13, 14-year-old girl, I had no idea what the World Trade Center was. I had no idea what the significance of it was. And I remember sitting there watching the TV, just, trying to figure out, like, okay, why is this such a big deal? Like, I don't understand. And I saw the second plane hit the South Tower. And I was so confused. Like, what is going on here? Like, one accident happens, but this is two planes, two accidents. Like, what's the what are the odds of that happening? It didn't dawn on me that our country was under attack. As the day went on and we, continued to change classes and continue to watch updates on the TV throughout the school day, some of the most horrific scenes I saw, and that was completely devastating. I was scared. And once I realized the significance of what was happening, I was scared and I was confused. Yeah, I'll never forget.
My name is Travis Essick, North Carolina APCO Public Information Officer. On September 11th, 2001, I was 11 years old. I remember sitting in 6th grade science class when the teachers came in and started talking about something and no one really knew what was going on. A few minutes later, they turned on the TV, and for the next several hours, I remember sitting in silence just watching everything unfold on TV.
I'm Missy Ezel, Secretary for North Carolina APCO. On September 11th, 2001, I was at Burgaw Police Department as we received a phone call when the first plane hit the tower, and we turned the news on, and we watched as the second plane hit the towers. We saw the footage from the Pentagon, and we heard stories of Pennsylvania. We watched the footage live as the World Trade Center collapsed, minutes after, watching firefighters and police officers running into the building to save people. We should never forget September 11th, but we also should always remember September 12th, a day when this nation came together in unity, and our first responders were remembered as the heroes that they are.
September 11th, 2001. Today started off fairly normal for me, starting my first year at UNCG, and I was heading to my psychology class, and then quickly learned of the news of what was happening in New York. I immediately went into panic and fear because my mother was traveling down to North Carolina for her birthday. We were going to spend her birthday here in North Carolina, and I immediately tried to make contact with her, and to no avail, was unable because of the phone lines and all networks being down for several hours. So this fear went on for about 12 hours until I was finally able to make contact with her, still glued to the TV watching as the story developed, and it was filled with the unknown. I will never, ever forget that day, but I am grateful that even though she was stuck in DC for several days and unable to make it to her final destination until different security clearances were lifted, my mother was unharmed in this, but I can't ever forget the many people that lost their lives, our heroes that lost their lives on this day that we will never, ever forget. September 11th, 2001.
Lori Laughlin, North Carolina APCO Treasurer. For me, 9/11 was a lot of worry. I was home that day painting and heard about the towers being hit and the attempt at the Pentagon, and I had friends and family that were in New York as well as near the Pentagon, so there was a lot of struggle trying to get in touch with people that day. So it was later in the afternoon to find out that your friends and family were okay or not okay.
So hi everybody. Where was I on September the 11th of 2001 when the terrorist attacks first started? I was asleep. I had actually flown home the night before that from Georgia and was scheduled to be at work at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, September the 11th. My former husband came home at 10 o'clock and woke me up to tell me that the United States was under attack. We turned the TV on in time to see the North Tower fall, and I remember a feeling of devastation, thinking, where were we? But I knew Guilford County had a lot of potential targets for terrorists. But about 30 minutes later, we received a page that everybody needed to return to work at 1 p.m. at the 911 center. And while on my way to the 911 center, the sheriff sent out a message that the reserve unit for the sheriff's department was being activated that night to provide protection at the Greensboro airport. So I went in and worked from 1 p.m. to 11 p.m. at the 911 center. At 11 p.m. I changed uniforms and went to work for the sheriff's department, patrolling the grounds of the airport until 6 a.m. the next morning. It was a very aware time, patrolling the perimeter of the airport. It was very nervous, not knowing what to expect, but I hope that nobody ever forgets the feeling that we had on September the 12th and the unity that everybody had.
I'm Jamison Sears, North Carolina NENA Treasurer. September 11, 2001, I was a senior in high school and remember sitting in class when they turned the TVs on and started talking about what was going on. Everyone was in shock and not understanding what was unfolding.
I was asleep when the tragedy occurred because I had worked a night shift. And with my team, we just started our night shift for that 2 weeks, and I got home about 7:30. I was in bed by 8:30. And the TV was on in my room, but the sound was muted. I got up around 12:30 to go to the bathroom and glanced at the screen and realized something had happened, so I turned the sound up and started watching, and I didn't go back to bed. I just stayed up and waited for my wife and daughters to get home. And then I got ready for work that night, and when I got there, of course, everything was pretty quiet, everyone coming to work, and I don't remember being very busy that night. I guess a lot of people were doing the same thing. I was off duty Wednesday and Thursday, but I watched a lot of TV, and I remember seeing that video made by the doctor, and he was also a reporter or photographer, and he had his camera rolling when the South Tower collapsed, and you could hear the pass devices on the SCBAs of the firefighters, and it's very eerie just to hear one, because you know it detects non-movement by a firefighter, but you're hearing several, and you realize that you're hearing the sound of deceased.
20 years ago on 9/11, I had just moved back from across the country to North Carolina and decided to visit my parents that day. It's a visit I'll never forget.
Hi, Vic Williams, your Eastern North Carolina rep for NC NENA. My day on September 11th, 2001 started off kind of normal. I just worked a night shift with North Carolina Highway Patrol, Troop A Communications. I was carrying my son to the babysitters, who was only 2 years old at the time. En route to the babysitters, I received a phone call that a plane had crashed into one of the twin towers. Didn't really believe it. Got to the babysitters, wanted to get to the TV, see the news. And as I'm sitting there, I see the second plane coming in, and I tell the babysitter's husband that I look at him and said, "We're at war." He was an Air Force veteran, and you could see the tears in his eyes. And he said, "You're exactly right, Vic. We're at war." So needless to say, I had a long day, no sleep, and back on night shift that night with the tightest security I'd ever seen the whole time I've worked for the North Carolina Highway Patrol. God bless you.
My name is Donna Wright, and I am currently serving on the North Carolina 911 Board as the representative of the National Emergency Number Association in North Carolina. On September the 11th, I was the training officer for Richmond County Emergency Services, and that particular day, I remember being in the office and watching the news coverage like everyone else, just absolutely amazed at what we were witnessing, but also what we were seeing from the servants who ran in when everyone else was trying to run out, and the heartfelt pain that we had for those first responders. There was a lot of good that came out of our country that day. The patriotism, the support and mutual aid, trying to help our brothers and sisters in New York City, trying to just make headway in this massive response that was so big that I still today can't wrap my head around. But there are some good things that came out of September the 11th. Most people don't know the history of the Telecommunicator Emergency Response Task Force, or TERT. That initiative and idea started with 3 PSAP managers in North Carolina. Most people don't realize that at the time when this was going on, these 3 PSAP managers were looking at each other and trying to figure out how we could manage something like that if it happened in North Carolina. And we kept hearing all the response of the needed firefighters, the police officers, paramedics, emergency management professionals, that mutual aid up to the state to help with this incident. But never did we ever hear anything about telecommunicators, and that became the conversation of these 3 gentlemen. The 3 gentlemen were Philip Penny, who was then the current Raleigh-Wake 911 director, Jason Barber, the 911 director at Johnston County, and Craig Whittington, who was the 911 director at Guilford County's PSAP before the consolidation with Guilford Metro. So these 3 gentlemen thought, well, if this happened, how could we mutual aid and support the telecommunicators? And with that conversation and idea, they came up with, we need to build a mutual aid plan. And that's what started in North Carolina in 2001. These 3 gentlemen invited some other PSAPs to join them in the conversation, and there were a total of 7, I believe, that met the first meeting in Raleigh. And then they formed a committee. They took this idea, they worked with North Carolina APCO, and a database was built because we gathered all information as part of the database to match PSAPs up should something happen and someone needed help. They looked at the phone system, the CAD system, DCI modules, protocols used, or EMD. And they then matched up other PSAPs that had those skill sets that they could send to another PSAP for help. And we had our first deployment at a pharmaceutical plant that exploded. We also have had many since that first deployment. But they worked with emergency management with an MOU to be able to be notified through EM and our point of contact that was there at the chapter level, who would then work the mutual aid requests. So there's a lot of good that came out of that, and a lot of that was North Carolina history that's now grown into an international initiative when national NENA and national APCO actually joined together to do the National Joint TERT Initiative that you know today. There's even an independent study for TERT deployments that's been developed. So the key to this is we have to look at lessons learned when we have bad incidents and what we can do to improve the future. And an idea of 3 gentlemen came together, which now is an international approach to mutual aid for telecommunicators. So in your career as a telecommunicator, all the way up to that PSAP manager, to always remember, you can have an idea, but you got to share it, and let's make it grow, and you can change this industry. And that's exactly what these gentlemen did 20 years ago, trying to fill a gap for our heroes under the headset, making sure they had the support they needed to do the job that was thrown at us all that day on September the 11th, 2001. Thank you.